It's so much fun to play Minecraft, right? Until you realize that Steve is the most miserable character in the whole game. Well, get ready, because after you learn about Steve's sad life, you'll never see him the same way again. Let's start with the latest news, because in the Minecraft movie, they showed us a side of Steve that we had never seen before. But when you analyze it, it'll break your heart. Because at first glance, it seems like Steve has a happy life that's not much different from anyone else's, but come on, nothing is what it seems. Steve is actually a very sad and lonely man. He's dissatisfied with his life for several very tragic reasons. Since he was a child, he had many traumas, which we will analyze little by little. First of all, let's talk about Steve's biggest trauma. From an early age, Steve realized that he would probably never be able to have friends. He was the outcast and misfit wherever he went. No one could understand him or stand him. For many, he was simply a clown, just like Natalie told him. And this is something very key to know more about Steve's story. Well, the Minecraft movie didn't just want to make us laugh with these comments, but if we look at it from a deeper perspective, they're explaining to us how it really was. Pretty much everything. Steve's whole life. They always made fun of him for his ideas and the way he acted. His outstanding personality was something unpleasant for others. Everything they said to Steve in the movie was probably also done to him when he was a child, a young man, and of course also as an adult. And probably because of all these horrible comments that were made to Steve, he began to lose his self-esteem and distanced himself from others, stopping socializing. This would explain very well his lack of skill, as we saw in the movie. It's not that Steve wanted to act weird to be funny or to be liked. The truth is that he didn't know how to interact with others. We see him living a pretty boring and lonely life. And I wouldn't doubt that the thought of taking his own life crossed his mind at some point. And this might sound a bit exaggerated to many, but wait until we keep analyzing his tragic life. One of the saddest things about Steve is that it seems like he doesn't have any family or anyone close who cares about him. It's been a long time since Steve entered Minecraft and disappeared, and people were more concerned about selling and releasing their stuff than asking themselves, where has Steve gone? Sad, isn't it? Just wait, because now we're reaching the most important part, when Steve enters Minecraft. At first, all Steve does is build like crazy, explore the world and build even more. It seems normal, right? But what if I told you that this explains the pain Steve is going through right now? When Steve enters Minecraft, it's as if he's given a second chance to live his life and finally be happy. That's why he builds an apparently cheerful world and calls it Steve's World. Well, this is just one side of the coin, because even though he manages to build great creations, he still feels lonely. In fact, he even admits it himself when he says he needs a companion. With moments like that, I longed for a friend. And this is where Dennis Lobo comes in. He becomes his only friend. The Minecraft movie made this clear to us. The wolves in the game are not just a coincidence. They're there because of how lonely Steve is. Well, if we analyze it more deeply, the wolf is almost a clear representation of the same story that Steve has. The wolf is a solitary animal that only needed a bit of understanding to be approached. And this is quite accurate, since the second friend that Steve manages to make is Garrett, who is practically another solitary and misunderstood wolf. In the same movie, Steve tells us that the years went by very quickly, and we can see how he ages, especially because of the gray hairs that grow in his beard and hair. But then, how could a normal person spend so many years alone without interacting with other people? Psychology and studies show this is hard for many people. Humans are designed to have interactions and socialize with other humans, which confirms to us that almost all of Steve's life, he was always alone. He was possibly talking to imaginary friends or to himself in his mind. He spent years without feeling strange? How come this wasn't enough for him to return to the real world and leave the Minecraft dimension? Well, I think this also explains why Steve wanted to stay in the Nether. Because it's not that he was captured or that he didn't have a way out. If you look closely at the scene where he sends Dennis to hide the artifact, you can clearly see that Steve also had time to escape. But instead he stays and lets himself get caught. I think he did this on purpose, to be in the company of what was closest to a human interaction, which is with the piglins. And if this still doesn't make you feel sorry for Steve, we have to analyze the end of the movie. If you noticed, the only one who connected with Steve was Garrett. Basically, he was the only one who wanted to be his friend, because in reality, none of the other characters seemed interested in having a close friendship with Steve. The only one who really made an effort to ask Steve to come back to the real world and not stay. And besides Garrett, the only one who even thought a little about being friends with Steve was Henry. And we can tell this from the scene when the Enderman played with his mind. Here we saw how he considered Steve a little bit as a friend, but clearly, at the end of the movie, we could see that he actually didn't have much interaction with him. The saddest part of all this is that Henry did consider Garrett his friend. He even admitted it himself. But if you thought this was sad, wait until we analyze how depressing Steve's life is inside the game of Minecraft. Let's start with the most basic thing of all, Steve's skin. This skin, which you basically don't choose yourself, is the one that comes by default in the game. I think we've very rarely seen anyone excited to have Steve's skin. Normally people want to have their own skin, their favorite YouTuber's skin, or a character's skin. But Steve's? I think we all agree that when we see someone with Steve's skin, we know they're a noob. Possibly a little kid who's learning to play Minecraft and doesn't know what they're doing, leaving the skin aside. Let's examine Steve's life. Basically, he appears in Minecraft when you start a new game. He shows up alone in an empty world that only has a few default structures, which don't always turn out perfect. It seems like he's the only one of his kind, since the villagers can't be compared to him at all. Could we say that Steve appears just to live alone and build without any real purpose? Imagine arriving in Minecraft and having to stay there forever. And I'm not talking about multiplayer, because as we already said, when you see someone with the Steve skin, it's probably a noob. Very few people actually want to choose Steve, which once again confirms that he's the outcast. You'd basically be there, just building to fill a void. Maybe Mojang saw how sad Steve's situation was. And that's why they added Alex, so that finally Steve would have some company in that lonely world. Maybe this represents Alex at the end of the Minecraft movie, the end of Steve's depressing life, because he finally starts to have some company in his life. The worst part of Steve's life is that he can't even die. He's condemned to an eternal life full of loneliness. So for Steve, there is no easy way out. In fact, this immortality is actually a curse, not a blessing. How many of us haven't had our first tamed wolf, whom we loved very much and wanted to bring along on all our adventures? Until one day, for whatever reason, it ends up dying. Steve can come back to life. But how do we know that the next wolf we tame is going to be the same wolf we had before? Even if you tame and capture a horse and it dies, you know it's not the same horse, even if you find another that looks identical. Basically, Steve sees everything he cares about die while he is eternal. But how many of you actually know where Steve comes from in the game? Do you know how sad the story behind his name was? Actually, Steve doesn't have any official lore. The only thing we know is that he came from a game his creator, Notch, was developing called Zombie Town. In it, we can see that there are many Steves running around, although they actually look more like a lot of Herobrines. Back then, Steve didn't have a name yet. In fact, in the alpha version of Minecraft, he was known as Zombie. And it was sometime later that many players started calling Steve to two skins that only lasted 2 days in the game. White Steve and Black Steve. From there, many people started calling a lot of mobs and objects in Minecraft Steve. It was possibly because of this that his creator Notch decided to name him Steve. And even though it might sound like a nice story, imagine if your parents didn't know what names to give you and ended up naming you after the nickname people know you by at school. That really does sound very sad. Steve's tragic life and situation can also be seen reflected in the sad songs that the game Minecraft has. Some people may hear it as a relaxing song, but most, after thinking about it, believe that they are very sad songs for the overworld. I'm sure that the next time you start a new game of Minecraft and use your Steve skin, you won't see him the same way again. But then, what's the real problem? What's Steve's purpose? To solve this big question, we have 3 possible explanations. But spoiler alert, none of them end in a happy ending. The first one comes from Steve's origin. So he was the only survivor of the zombie attack in the game. Where does he come from? And even though surviving a zombie invasion might seem like a good thing if you really think about it, it's actually pretty sad since practically all his family and friends died. If you don't believe me, you probably haven't seen I Am Legend. Tell me, what purpose would you have if you were the only human who survived? I mean, you wouldn't even be able to reproduce. The second explanation is even emptier, and it's about Steve simply appearing in Minecraft. And he has no idea what his purpose in life is. He doesn't know why he's there, how he got there, or what he's supposed to do. I mean, he just lives for the sake of living, waiting for everything to repeat in an endless cycle. And this really matches the saying that there are fates worse than death. And the last one is a theory that Steve didn't just arrive by chance, but that his arrival and his stay in the world of Minecraft were planned and thoroughly studied. This theory suggests Steve came from another dimension to study Minecraft when he arrived. And then he knows he has to do certain things like use tools, craft weapons, and he even knows he has to kill the dragon. So in this theory, Steve does have a purpose. But it's not exactly a nice thing either, because he left everything behind to go to a world where he'll be alone for the rest of his life. And who knows if he'll ever return to the dimension he belongs to? Basically, no matter how you look at it, Steve has a sad and depressing life. But tell me, friends, had you ever stopped to think about how sad Steve's life is? Let us know in the comments.